start with AD because she is my right-hand woman. Why do you think that it's an issue this cycle when it wasn't in the past?
I think part of it is open race, right? We need people with fresh ideas, and one of those fresh ideas is how do we reduce inequality in the city? We've also seen really high-profile debates over these huge developments like Lincoln Yards, like the 78, other high-profile stuff going on in the 41st Ward, 45th Ward. That's just brought attention to what a gap there is, and I think we're 120,000 units short of what this city needs in terms of affordable housing units. And we're also seeing, massive population loss from the city, and a lot of people are blaming that on how unaffordable it is for many people to live in the city.
Craig, you've been with WBBM, correct me if I'm wrong, since 2001 as the City Hall editor.
As the City Hall editor, but I've been with WBBM since 1983.
Gotcha, okay.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah. So for those of us who haven't spent that much time at City Hall, when somebody says aldermanic prerogative, what are they talking about, and how does that play into the affordable housing debate?
Well, it may be part and parcel of the of what goes on with affordable housing, because it is the power of an alderman to say yay or nay to any kind of development project that goes on in his or her ward. And that really wasn't something that even got talked about. Frankly, there are no written rules. This is a policy that is kind of developed. But where it comes into, first off, where it comes into matters of crime, as it has lately, it is because people who want something from an alderman, like a zoning change, have to do something to convince that alderman that they want it. Most people would probably use words, but other people...
This is Chicago, Craig.
Yes, but this is Chicago. But where it is involved with housing is because when some developer wants to put affordable housing into an area, they still have to go to the alderman. And if you are in, say, John Arena's ward, the alderman says, yes, that's a good thing. Let's have more affordable housing. And then some people in his area may say, no, we don't think that's a good thing. It's going to change our lifestyle, and they fight him. But there are other wards that don't have much affordable housing. And that's where it becomes a real problem, because some wards can get a lot of it, and some wards feel they're being dumped on, but then there are other wards that have resisted. And that is why, one of the reasons why people are talking about either limiting aldermanic prerogative, which is perhaps in a ward that has less, what is it, less than 20% of affordable housing, you can't say no to any to a development just because. That's one of the proposals, but some are saying it should be eliminated entirely.
So, Jason, you, I should, in the interest of full disclosure, is working for Lori Lightfoot's campaign. So if you want all of the inside scoop on what's going on there, please see him afterwards. So we'll keep this discussion focused on policy, but how do aldermen deal with issues like that? And how do they use polling to sort of, or, to make those decisions? Or are they all guided by what's true and light and puppies in uniform?
The last part.
Yes,
yeah.
yes, that's what I thought.
So I should say I do teach at the Harris School, but one of the other things that I do most of the time is I provide polling and strategic advice for campaigns and candidates here in the city and throughout the country. A lot of that is focused on how to win an election, 50+1, or in next Tuesday's case, just 1 plus the next person, because a lot of people are not going to get to 50. But also it's helping them understand the nature of the community that they live in. Many people have represented a community for a long time and might not have realized how the community has changed or the population is changing. For other people, they're looking to represent that community and want to get a better sense. As I'm sure you're all aware, in a ward like the 45th Ward, there are very, very strong opinions on both sides of a project like the 5150 project. You can go to a meeting. You could go to a meeting, as some of you have been today, for Lincoln Yards or for the 78, and hear very, very articulate and sometimes inarticulate and often and always loud positions about what people think on development or the type of community they want to live in. That doesn't always measure what's happening in the entire ward. And a smart campaign, I think, will use public opinion research to get a sense of, on a representative sample, what people actually care about, whether this is something that motivates them or doesn't motivate them. Not only do they have an opinion on, for example, 5150 or Lincoln Yards, maybe they're not even paying much attention, but where's the enthusiasm, where's the energy? And for a campaign that will have to make really difficult choices about what to say when it communicates to voters, because they really don't have a lot of bandwidth to get a lot of messages across, making sure that they're talking about the right things and to the right people.
Great. Is there, do you think, even possible for aldermanic prerogative to be eliminated? Because it's an unwritten rule, right? It's, don't vote to approve this in my ward because I don't want it, and I won't vote to approve whatever you don't want in your ward. Or are we going to have to see a situation where, like Bill Daley has suggested, reducing the number of aldermen so it's no longer, you know, sort of the 45th Ward. It's more of a regional approach. Craig, you're scowling at me.
I mean, unfortunately, these in some ways are arguments that each in and of themselves should be separate, because reducing the number of aldermen doesn't necessarily change your problem. It simply reduces the places you have to go to have the problem. Because people feel that their alderman belongs to them. It's their neighborhood. That alderman knows their neighborhood. So I think the thing that I think you're going to have trouble doing is reducing the size of the city council. Aldermanic prerogative, I think enough aldermen are either hearing from the FBI or fearing that they're on a tape somewhere, that they are willing to listen to the discussion about reducing aldermanic prerogative. But let me just make the counter argument that some make, and frankly, some people, and I think, I don't think, does Daley now say, because he's been a little soft on it.
It's been a little wishy-washy.
But Tony Preckwinkle says, no, don't get rid of it.
And of course, Tony Preckwinkle
Former alderman.
was an alderman who exercised her aldermanic prerogative in the 4th Ward.
Right, and the argument is, shouldn't someone be able to say no on behalf of a community? And it is a good argument if you're trying to keep something bad out, like too many liquor stores. Shouldn't you be able to say, I don't want another liquor store on that corner? And the answer is probably yes. But should you be able to say, I don't want more affordable housing in that area? And maybe you shouldn't be able to say that. So there are going to be fights, and the city council has to decide whether it's going to give it up. But I think the atmosphere is better now than it ever has been. So if it's going to be changed, it will be changed in the next year, I think.
In the next year, and I think part of it will also be what does the mayor communicate to department heads about how long you can hold on to something. Because what we saw from Ed Burke was leaning on someone at CETA, leaning at someone on licensing to kind of hold something up. And I would like to know how many developments, affordable or not, or any kind of regular development that never even got it to the table because the alderman said no very early on or signaled clearly that this is not the kind of development that I want.
I mean, we saw that in the Lincoln Yards development, right? Alderman Hopkins, whose 2nd Ward includes the development, said, I don't want a soccer stadium, so poof, went the soccer stadium, and I don't want the giant entertainment venue, and poof, went the giant entertainment venue, and that sped the way, you know, for it to advance. So, you know, are there people who oppose Lincoln Yards who are glad that those aspects are gone? Sure. Do they wish that they had sort of more of a chance to kill it, even now they've gotten some what they want? That's sort of the fundamental, you know, issue.
Yeah, and the other part is what does your community input process look like, and who are the people that are at the table with you if you're an alderman saying, I think this is a good idea or I don't? So I'll be interested to see what individual aldermen say they want to do about, here's what my community zoning board will look like, and here's who will serve on it.
And that's the other thing that becomes a factor here. You have 50 aldermen. You can have 50 different styles of operating. If you know, Joe Moore, for example, has this really big outreach of budgeting where he holds meetings and people can give him ideas. Now, I don't know whether at the end it's not what he really wanted to do anyway, but still.
He goes through the motions, is what you're saying.
He does, and that's important. But you can have another alderman who just holds everything very close to the vest. And so the different styles, well, that's what voters do, is if you don't like the style, get somebody else in.
At the end of the day, I think it will be interesting to see how much aldermanic prerogative plays a role in these elections, because for the most part, voters have no idea that this is something that exists. They are not paying attention on a day-to-day basis to what's going on in City Hall. When it affects their community directly, they might start to perk up a little bit. But I mean, I can guarantee you that we never talked about this in 2015 in the races we did, or 2011 or before. Even when you're talking about the Walmarts in 2007, this was not something that was a really powerful argument. And the reason for that is that it's a process. And processes don't make for great campaigns, and they don't make for great communications. Voters want to know that you agree with them on their values and that you share their priorities. Talking about the processes through which things do or don't get passed is a great way to get someone to glaze over when you're at their door. So trying to make these issues connect, that's the challenge that the mayoral candidates and others have when they talk about what are really sort of complicated issues for most voters.
Okay, and just can I add one other quick thing? The housing issue has so many other dimensions to it. It's not just about aldermanic prerogative. A lot of it, those of us who were raised in the 60s recognize some of the language that was used at some of the debates as very reminiscent of what we heard during the fair housing era. And some of it's adjusted. Now we talk density a little bit more than we talk character of the neighborhood.
There are different code words, which is what you're saying.
Very different code words, but you still have to deal with it on that level too. And so it's not just what the alderman says, but it's what an alderman has to do. And I keep bringing up John Arena, and I probably shouldn't, but he's the example I know the best of what an alderman has to do to get buy-in from the people in the area. And that's the job. You have to justify and persuade people.
Well, if affordable housing wasn't an issue in 2015, the teachers' union and the teachers' contract certainly was an issue in 2015, and it is an issue again in 2019, but perhaps things are it's playing out a little differently, I think. So the teachers' union was at war with Rahm Emanuel from the moment he took office in 2011, and now they've endorsed Toni Preckwinkle to be mayor. So if she is elected, it would be a very different relationship between the mayor and the city's, well, one of the city's largest and perhaps the most powerful union. AD, how is that, do you think, going to shape the negotiations for our next contract, or at least the debate over what that contract should have?
I know that Stacey Davis Gates, who's the former political director, now VP of the Chicago Teachers Union, has said, here's what we want. We're going to come out right in front several months before this election and say we want a 5% raise, we want wraparound services for our students, and we want increased affordable housing citywide, because we want to attract more students to a drastically under-enrolled district. I think there are 150,000 more seats than there are students at CPS. Elected school board is a big deal for them. I think I've asked Stacey about this, and she's like, Toni is a tough negotiator. Just because we've endorsed her doesn't mean that she's going to give over everything. And other people I've asked about this CTU, we've been doing an interview series with a lot of mayoral candidates.
Subscribe to the Eldercast.
Subscribe to the Eldercast. Have said, I want more wraparound services for students. I think that's important, but we need to find the money for it. And I don't want to lay out all my negotiating cards on the table quite yet.
So I was at that press conference that Stacey Davis Gates and Jesse Sharkey held a few months ago. It seems approximately like a year ago because it was before Ed Burke was criminally charged, and that's how I've begun measuring events in my life. But the reporters asked her, they said, you know, how are you going to pay for this? And Stacey Davis Gates was rich people. That was her whole answer, which I think is, you know, I think it shows you where the national political movement has changed, but is also not an answer I think you would have gotten in 2015 or 2011.
I mean, that's absolutely the case. I mean, that is, especially if you look at the makeup of the city, that is not going to be an unpopular answer. Even in the communities that are doing quite well, you have a very robust progressive community that, even if it might impact them personally, has a soft spot for this more progressive version of raising revenue. I mean, I think if you look at the fact that J.B. Pritzker won with a 54% majority statewide, basically pledging to raise taxes on the wealthy, and did incredibly well in parts of the city that are very, very high income. It's less the third rail than it ever has been, and that's true in polling, and that's certainly true as you see the 2020 contenders, sort of with one or two exceptions, rush to one side of the field to make it clear where their values are on this.
Yeah. I think what we may also see is kind of a merging of the two timelines from back in 2015 to now.
Like a Doctor Who episode.
Yes, there you go. Because remember, the relationship between Mayor Emanuel and Karen Lewis began with the F-bomb.
And just got better from there.
Well, but you know, as quiet as it's kept, they eventually came to have a degree of affection for each other. Because once they got past that, there was a mutual respect, and they could actually sit down and talk. And don't forget, you know, they did reach a contract agreement. They did come to a better relationship. And Toni Preckwinkle, on the other hand, is starting very close to them, but she's going to have the realities of the budget. So she may have to say no a couple of times. They are aware of that, but that may also, at some point, bring tension.
Yeah, a lot of that respect was forged in the strike, I think, as well.
Yes.
And Jason, have you guys done any polling on how much people love teachers?
People like teachers. Attacking teachers is not going to be one of the more popular things that we'll test in our surveys. It's interesting when you talk about some of the reforms and some of the positions that CTU is advocating for. It's very difficult to argue with it from a political context. If you talk about raising taxes on the wealthy, that's going to be incredibly popular in different communities in the city. The elected school board, there was a poll this year that had 83% of Chicago voters say that they were supportive of an elected school board. I think they gave arguments against it, and then support dropped down to 82%. People think that there should be more of a public say in who's making policies and public education in Chicago. Almost every mayoral candidate has gotten there, a few have not. But that is going to be a difficult starting point for anybody walking into a negotiation with Jesse Sharkey and with Stacey Davis Gates, knowing that in many cases, whether or not they get the messaging right is a different thing, but they do have the public behind a lot of what they want. Now, ask people if they want to pay more in property taxes, and you get a slightly different conversation.
So the MPC was part of the Vote Equity Project survey, and I was not, I don't know if surprised is the right word, but it certainly caught my eye that the #1 ranked way to best help build a Chicago that works for all of us was to ensure that each school had a librarian and a nurse and ample social workers and counselors, which could have been written by the CTU and was sort of a critical part of what they tried to get, you know, certainly in the last contract, if not in the 2012 contract. Is the city's budget problems, which we haven't even really gotten to, but trust me, it's not great. Does that sort of preclude that sort of service investment, do you think, Craig?
I'm not sure, because don't forget, the school's budget is separate from the city's. It has its own problems, but it also, in some ways, has the potential for more money. The school funding formula has changed. The schools are getting more money. The issue is what it does with it, and frankly, an elected school board may bring in more transparency about that, but this is a moment when new decisions can be made. So yeah, we'll have to see what the final numbers are going to look like, but the schools are going to get more money than they've gotten before.
I wondered if Rahm Emanuel is going to try to do something big on pre-K, early education pre-K before he leaves. I feel like there's not enough time, but if the city doesn't
The clock
do that,
is ticking.
Yeah, how much money does that free up for all the wraparound services that CTU and a lot of the city wants?
So I think that brings me to an interesting question. What do you think Rahm Emanuel's school's legacy is going to be? I think we're going to see an elected school board at some point.
Fully elected?
I mean, I didn't say fully elected, but do you think that he will leave office with a legacy sort of, be able to point to the schools as a point of pride, or is it going to be something that he shifts the spotlight elsewhere?
If his favorability is underwater, which is pretty much where I've seen it in most surveys, and it ranges from a few points underwater to significantly more.
What? He told me he was going to win if he'd run again.
He may
Jason,
have.
are you?
A candidate's favorability is not the only thing that he was not particularly popular in 2015 either.
But that sweater.
Yeah, it was nice. It was fuzzy. But if you're looking at the 2015 election as a referendum on the closing of CPS schools, and there is a difference in his standing now that is not positive, and obviously some of that has to do with crime, some of that has to do with police accountability, but I think it would be naive to say that the damage that was done in that first strike and the damage that was done by closing those schools and the damage that was done in some of these communities, which you're still reckoning with in places like the 46th Ward, where the Stewart School is now becoming another very complicated issue, not because it's not a place of education, but because you have $4,000 a month condos now that people can move into. I think that is part of what is a really complicated legacy. That doesn't mean that there aren't elements of it that are popular and that are positive as well, some of what he's done with the community colleges in particular. But to gloss over that is probably missing the point of what is, probably not the high point of his tenure as mayor.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think there is any question that the scores, the actual learning in the schools has gotten better. There are more parents who feel that they can send their children to public schools and not feel embarrassed or feel like they've failed them in any way. The problem is that doesn't hold true everywhere. But I think his legacy is going to be that he brought the schools forward, but just not far enough.
Yeah. I mean, I am one of those parents. Our son is going to be going into kindergarten in September, and we are fully planning on sending him to a CPS school, but I know that there are parents and communities across the city who don't feel like they can make that decision, and that's what you need to be measured on at the end of the day.
So you said the nice segue into the next segment, and I appreciate that, Jason.
No problem.
Police accountability, something that Mayor Emanuel will certainly be judged on. So the next mayor, whoever he or she may be, will have a significant less ability to control the police department, because the police department will be under a consent decree after the Laquan McDonald shooting. On top of that, the city's contract with the Fraternal Order of Police expired not last June, but the June before, so it is very expired, and they will have to negotiate a new agreement. Is an agreement even possible, considering that the FOP endorsed President Trump and is at war with basically everybody to the left of President Trump?
I've spoken to a lot of mayoral candidates about police staffing. Almost all of them want more police staffing, which is something I think the department agrees with. Rank and file wants there to be more fellow officers, so they're working less overtime. I think this future mayor is going to lean a lot on, well, I can't give you that because look, oh, the consent decree says I can't do that. The cost is another factor. It's just like the CTU issue. But I have only heard a couple mayoral candidates say what they want to do about civilian oversight of the police department, which is something
That's the other big issue.
Yeah, city council has kind of left up in the air after a lot of debate, a lot of meetings, a lot of ordinance drafting. There are only a couple candidates who have said, I want the GAPA proposal, which is Lori Lightfoot, and Amara Enya has said, I've met with both the GAPA people and the CPAC people, and I think the city council gives us a clean slate. So it sounds like a lot of people are going to be negotiating from zero on police oversight, and we know the FOP doesn't want any of those proposals. So I think a lot of people will be leaning on the consent decree, but there's a lot that isn't in the consent decree that needs to be negotiated, including how long the department holds on to disciplinary records, and a couple other big deal items.
Yeah, what we've seen from the police up to this point is they're interested in a pay increase, a substantial one, and they want to talk about community policing. In some ways, the consent decree, I think, frees up, relaxes the tension between the whoever is mayor and the FOP, because, as AD said, there are some things that are just going to be built into the structure that have to be there because the court says they have to be there. So the kinds of things they have to talk about right now are things that they can easily negotiate on. And as far as civilian oversight, yes, that is a major issue, but I think it's going to be more of an issue for the community than it is for the FOP, because I don't think it's going to get down to the police officer level. I don't think there's any structure that they're going to approve that is going to affect the line officers, but it will definitely affect administration.
How would the next mayor use polling to thread this needle? Or can they?
Well, as in between GAPA or CPAC, or
Well, just when you've got a police union that's saying we don't need any more oversight, this consent decree is already, constraining us too greatly to be able to do our jobs. How do you as mayor, I would assume you don't want to look like you're soft on crime, right? But you also have an emerging progressive.
What's soft on crime in 2019 and what was soft on crime in 2011 is dramatically different in the public's perception. The idea of, in Philadelphia, you have a defense lawyer who's now their district attorney, and someone like Kim Foxx, who, full disclosure, I work for her campaign, who probably could never have gotten elected in this city, 10 or 15 years ago, as a reformer, was handily elected with a majority of the vote. You would use polling from the perspective of, first of all, what kind of standing do you have as mayor? I think it's unfortunate, but it's quite possible, depending on who the mayor is, and you can ask me later on specifics for this, will not be particularly popular when they start office, and will then be forced with some really dramatic budget decisions that will probably not make them more popular, and decisions on police accountability that will not make them more popular. And so determining what you spend whatever limited, or in some cases potentially greater capital on in the first couple of months or years will be really, really important. And understanding that through the data will be helpful to know what you can and can't achieve. To one of Craig's points earlier, having the consent decree sort of release some of the tension on police accountability, I think that would be great, and it would be a relief for folks. It sort of depends on who's enforcing that consent decree. Is it the Trump DOJ, or is it the Harris DOJ? And I think in a year or two from there, and I think that is a very, very different set of circumstances that would warrant a number of different strategic considerations for whoever the mayor is, in terms of whether or not they're going to win in court, or whether or not they're going to be able to see these tough decisions that they've given their capital up enforced by the decree.
Can I give you a quick poll trick?
Please do.
And I'm admitting I'm stealing this from Bill Clinton, who was a master at another way politicians can use polls. And Clinton always said he always knew what he wanted to do. He would poll to find out which argument resonated the best with people when he had to explain it.
Do you think this crop of mayoral candidates is that savvy?
Hopefully
Yes.
their pollsters are.
In fact, yes, exactly, exactly. But yes, I mean, you can use it to help how you present the conclusion you've already reached.
I ask because our current polling has, no one above 17%. So the arguments they're making currently
Somebody's as high as 17?
depends on what poll you're looking at. Tony Preckwinkle's own poll has her at 21%, but
Well,
it's an own poll, if you will.
Yes. Nice.
All right, I think we're ready to open it up to questions since you've listened to us babble on for long enough. I have been assured that there is a microphone that can be thrown out to the room, or you could just stand up and yell, which is probably what I would do.
We're going to steal one of yours. Great.
I'm going to borrow one.
A quick question.
Okay.
Just. Do you know where each of the mayoral candidates stand on term limits?
I'd have to remember all 14.
Well, the top that come to mind.
Yeah.
Top
Most of them.
I don't
Top
think it's fair
five.
to ask us to name all 14 candidates.
And it's a
That I could
mix.
do, but-
It's a mix because some are in favor of term limits for aldermen, and some are in favor of term limits for mayor, and some are in favor of term limits for both. I believe Bill Daley is in favor of 2 term limits for mayor.
Yeah, I'd say the majority of them are in favor of term, is it?
I
Yeah, I
think so.
believe the
yeah.
majority of them are in favor of term limits.
It would seem that if you want term limits for the mayor, you should also have term limits for city council and vice versa. Otherwise, one branch of government is going to be a lot stronger than the other. And as it is, we have great inequality in that area.
I can tell you where you can find out. The Daily Line is a member of a reporting collaborative, and we have a website called chi.vote, chi.vote, and we have a little tag just for term limits, so check that out.
Okay.
Can you introduce yourself when you ask the question?
Sure. My name's Nidra Fears. So I was at a debate on Saturday at the Urban League, and the candidates were talking about having a smaller ward, and Preckwinkle said that she thought that reducing the ward would really significantly reduce black and brown power, and she really was against it. The others were
In
for
reducing the
it.
size of the city council.
Right. So can you kind of elaborate what that thought process might be?
The wards are basically, the idea behind them anyway, is that they are neighborhoods. And so if you have fewer wards, then more people have to go to one alderman in order to get service, in order to get help, or even information. Now, if you make those wards so big that they go past neighborhood boundaries, then you might have, the more wealthy people in a district or in a ward be the ones who are the squeaky wheels, who know how to get the alderman to act, versus some other people. So yeah, I think you lose individual power or individual access if you reduce the number of wards.
The other thing to watch out for, regardless of whether city council gets smaller, is after this next census, there will be a ward remap. And Chicago has seen such drastic black population decline that
Boom.
black aldermen are likely to lose 2 wards after this next remap, which will be a big battle on city council.
It's going to be a very, very ugly remap when it comes time to figure out how to try to keep communities together and do it equitably and do it fairly. And in 11 or 12, a lot of those decisions were kind of pushed off a little bit, but the demographic trends have not changed, and if anything, in some cases have accelerated, and it's going to be really, really interesting. One other point, I think Chicagoans actually are at this point somewhat spoiled, and that's a good thing to have so many people representing them. That is not the case in some of the other larger cities in the country, where, for example, in Philadelphia, there are 10 at-large 10 council members that represent different communities for a city of 1.4 million people.
I was going to say that the last remap was also overseen by Alderman Ed Burke.
Yeah.
Is he going to be reelected? I don't know. And Alderman Pat O'Connor, is he going to be reelected? I don't know. But regardless of whether those two win their elections, the city council is going to lose 100 years of experience just based on retirements. So you're looking at a very different city council, one with much less experience and perhaps less willing to horse trade as the councils have in the past.
Yep.
Maybe not so savvy that they can dominate the process as has been done in the past. The last remap was really, it got ugly at times.
Thank you.
So since the aldermanic, since the alderman is supposed to be nonpartisan, why do we have this gerrymandering? Why do we have this, like, it's like a cronyism and, what projects we can get thrown through by remapping and, getting aldermen that don't like our project out of there. People are upset about the Lincoln Yards. They think that was just thrown in to get it shoved through. Like, why don't we have neighborhood aldermanic representation? Why do we have to have remapping?
I think you just answered that.
Why don't we fight it?
Well, you certainly can. I mean, there will be a public process. There'll be hearings. And now, I wasn't covering the council during the last remap, but my understanding is that those meetings are not well attended.
Yes, and this is something Mary Sue Barrett will probably confirm that this is my thing. People need to come out. There's a guy who comes to like every council meeting. His name is George Blakemore.
Legend.
Yes, he is a legend.
Invoke the ancestor.
But you know what? He's the one person you can depend on that's going to come to everything. You need to find out when those meetings are going to be and come to them. I will tell you that I met now State Representative Teresa Ma as an activist during the remap process. And at one point, Chinatown was divided into 6 different wards. So you can count how many Asian aldermen there were, which were, at the time, none. There's one now, but he's from the north side. But Chinatown is now a lot more contiguous. That is the kind of fight that has to be had. If you want the neighborhood has to come out and say, this is what we want.
Yeah, Asian Americans are the fastest growing population in Chicago. I will also say, also on the Shy.vote website, a lot of mayoral candidates have sounded off and said, we need to do an independent remap. We need to turn this over to an independent body so that Chinatown isn't divided amongst 6 different wards. Englewood is divided up into 6 as well. Yes. Yeah. So back of the yard. Back of the yards too. There are a few mayoral candidates who have said, as part of this ethics reform, we should have an independent remap and take that power away from aldermen too.
Could you speak to the candidate's position on constitutional change to begin to look at some of the pension reform and progressive tax issues?
So I believe Bill Daley is the only candidate who has endorsed a change to the Constitution that would allow Illinois to pay a lower benefit to future and current pensioners. That's a position that was endorsed by Rahm Emanuel, but Governor Pritzker has said that he is completely opposed to it. Would take not only a vote of General Assembly, but also a referendum of the people.
It's just a non-starter at this point, given the makeup of the legislature and the makeup and where the state is. It's not. I mean, this is one of those questions where, depending on how the polling is worded, you can get dramatically different answers. But for people there's a reason that Bill Daley is now one of the candidates who's having so much money spent against him in this race, and it does have something to do with that, because that is in some some corners very, very unfair.
It's considered anti-union in some corners.
And no one is being fair to Bill.
But that's a really good point, one that we didn't really have time to get into tonight, but that starting in 2020, the city is looking at $1 billion of additional pension payments that it will have to find, somewhere. And, I like to say that city budgeting isn't all that much different than budgeting your household. You can either borrow money, you can either cut expenses, or you can get a new job and increase the money coming in. And the city has tried all three of those things at some point or another. And there's not a lot of easy answers left. So.
You talked a lot about polling tonight. I know that I've been a little disappointed by the external polls. I think that was shown in that Fox debate where Enya was upset that she didn't get in because she thinks her poll numbers would have been higher if it wasn't a month old. I think that's reasonable. One, I know there's reasons with the landline phones that it could be, but do you see any other reasons as to why the polls have been kind of rough? And two, from what you guys see in the field, do you see an indication that people are voting for their first choice in this first piece of the race, or if they are going to choose the one that will be the least worst or the best in the final runoff, et cetera?
AD, I think this is a question for you, right? No. To your first question, look, I think that the Fox News thing was a debacle. I think it was ridiculous. Even if you thought that poll had perfect methodology, this race is changing dramatically week by week, and to have inclusion in a poll based on inclusion in a debate based on a poll that was at that point a few weeks old, and you had a point, and so did all the other candidates who were frustrated by that process. And to have that be the sole determinant factor as well is ridiculous. And I can't speak to the methodology of that poll, but I tend to be skeptical of most polls' methodology until I've had a chance to really look at it. Look, there's not probably a ton of strategic voting going on in this race right now. You see some of it online. I think there is a movement by some candidates to sort of push that as a narrative, that you have to vote for X or you're going to get Y. But if you look at the data, people are really, really unsettled in this race. Is there anybody in this room who has not quite made up their mind yet? Okay. Well, you guys are paying attention. How do you think the people who haven't been paying any attention are feeling? This is going to come down to the last couple of days in this race. It really, really is. And the one or two candidates who you think have the lock on getting into the second round are not locks. This is going to come down to people in the last couple of days thinking through where they are, who represents the type of city they want to live in. The polling is really, really clear that there is no stable, locked-in base. I can't give specific numbers for internal data, but I'll just say in the last poll—
He will give them to you later. No.
Yes, you come see me. The last poll we did, 60% of the electorate had not locked in on one voter or not, and this is not that one candidate or not, and this is not that recent. I mean, not that far in the past. This is in the last couple of weeks. People are waiting. Early vote numbers are similar to 2015. But the 2016 and 2018 early vote numbers were significantly higher at this stage. And so I think this is people kind of holding back. Some might not vote, some might wait for the second round. A lot of people are going to decide at the last second that they really, in their heart of hearts, want candidate X, and they're going to go that way. I just don't see a lot of strategy involved when nobody really knows what's going to happen. You can't split the progressive vote in favor of one candidate or another when they're in the margin of error in most polling. That's just, they're basically tied. So who are you taking from? Pick the one you want.
And do not wait for the second round. Nobody in this, because that is a fear among some of the campaigns right now, some of the people in government, is that the people who are undecided are just going to stay home. That would be a guarantee that whoever has the biggest, most well-funded organization wins.
And I would caution everybody perhaps to be prepared mentally, if not in your heart, to not know who those top two vote vote getters are on February 26th. There has been a surge of mail ballot requests, which means that people can, give that those only have to be received by midnight on February 26th. So if it's close enough, we may not know, which is truly the nightmare scenario.
Isn't everybody excited about a recount? Won't that be fun?
And I'm people.
Haley was involved in one of those, so.
So I'm getting the high side. Oh, one more question.
And where do you think the candidates' position are on funding pension liabilities?
Well, we've asked them this, and a lot of them say there is no easy answer. Hey, look, there's a sparkly thing right over there. Isn't that? Let's talk about that sparkly thing. I mean, there aren't any easy answers.
There aren't any easy answers, but are there any positions taken?
I think most people think that there's no appetite for another property tax hike. Rahm Emanuel pushed through the largest property tax hike in Chicago history, in 2015. I don't think that's going to get a lot of traction. So we're looking at, some candidates favoring a LaSalle Street tax that would, tax financial transactions. There are other people who want there to be a city income tax. There is no city income tax right now. There are suggestions that Chicago should be taxing commuters who come into the city to work.
Have any of the candidates taken a position?
They have taken positions on individual taxes, but to be honest, no single thing, no four things are going to solve the problem.
Right.
So it's really something that's going to, they can tell us, yes, I want a casino. Yes, I want legalized marijuana.
Real estate transfer.
Real estate transfer tax. That's one of the bigger ones. Is for homes over $1 million, the real estate transfer tax. But it's still just getting at the edges of the problem. So that answer is going to come after a lot of talk and, frankly, making sure that everybody's on board, or at least everybody gets blamed for it.
And the reason you're not hearing specifics from a lot of mayoral candidates is because a lot of them don't want to tell you what taxes they want to raise. Another place you can look for what people think about pensions is Chi.vote. But a few specific ones we've also heard. Susana Mendoza has remained open to a pension obligation bond. She said, I'd have to take a look at it. But really, the answer you're getting from everyone is I'd have to take a look at it. And my caution to everyone is marijuana and casino will take a long time to get revenues coming in, and it will not
go. Yeah, but we'll be having so much fun.
We will be having a great time.
Yeah, we won't care.
All right, I think that wraps it up, and I am going to introduce Don Vincent, one of the owners of the Daily Line, and he's going to wrap us up.
Well, good evening. It really is great to see so many people here tonight. And so, my name's Don Vincent. I'm co-owner and publisher of the Daily Line. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. We hope you have learned a lot and are more prepared for casting your ballots here in the next week. I do want to say a big thank you to Mary Sue and her amazing team here at MPC. We're really honored to be in collaboration with you guys here. And how about one more applause for this panel? A.D. Quigg, Heather Sharon, Craig Gilmore, and Jason. You guys are awesome. Jason McGrath. And then last but not least, Matt Brewer, thank you for your sponsorship tonight. I'm a Chicago native here, and I've been involved with organizing and public participation for about a decade, maybe a little bit longer than that. And what Craig was saying before about getting involved and attending meetings, you have no idea how many times I've been on the consulting side and seen nobody show up in the community, and it's just the people who are there to present their projects getting to say. So you have to get involved, and I hope this inspires you to do that. Not me, this panel inspires you to get out there and attend meetings, because it is really important, and certainly with the redistricting that is coming up. this is going to be the first of many conversations, and I hope many more to come with MPC. As AD and Heather have pointed out, there are a ton of resources for you guys to inform yourself for not only this election, but moving forward. We have the Aldercast, which is an unbelievable podcast that AD does, and Hannah Mizell, our Springfield reporter, with all sorts of elected officials and decision makers around our city. So if you are not subscribed, check it out. You can go to iTunes or put an RSS feed on your computer if people still do that, or wherever you go for Android devices. Let's see, and AD stole it from me already, but we did a really cool collaboration with the Better Government Association, Block Club Chicago, Chicago Reporter, and the Tribe, and that is shy.vote. It is a really intuitive website. There's tons of great information on there. If you haven't voted already, go check it out. If you have voted, tell people who haven't voted to go check it out, because it's a great resource. One last thing. MPC has provided you all with printed copies of this. This has a lot of great information in there. If you haven't grabbed one already, they're on the counter right next to the bar. So if there's still drinks, grab one of these, have a cocktail, and look it over. And we're going to be here for another half an hour. So stay around, chat, ask some questions, and if you guys would like to subscribe or become members of the Daily Line, thedailyline.net is where to go. Thanks so much.